everyone, my name is Jayme McKellop and I work for the Spivey Consulting Group as formerly the Director of Admissions at the University of Chicago Law School. Today I'm going to be reading two applications to the University of Chicago Law School. So I'm going to read through those applications and talk through my thought process and give my reactions on the different application components as I go, and then at the end I'm going to give my impressions and a guess as to what I think their decision was. And I'll be very careful as I go through these not to give any identifying information because these are real applications. So my first applicant that I'm looking at, this is a person who has a 4.0 GPA and an LSAT of a 172. The application comes to us comes to the law school in a PDF form, and the first thing you see is the application form itself. First, I'm just getting a sense of the basic demographics and some background information about the person. And one thing that I do always notice is this is a good place where you can start to see attention to detail. Have they formatted things in the same way? Are they consistent in how they're formatting things? Have they filled in answers to all of the questions? In the GPA, majors on here. One thing that is standing out about this particular applicant as I read through the application form is this person has a lot of academic honors and awards and other recognitions. So there's a section on the application where the applicant can indicate any academic awards that they've received. And this is a particular strength of this application. I am noticing there's about 2 pages of academic awards and recognitions, and they are significant. Here's one given to one senior for great service, awarded to students in the top 0.5%. Here's a writing award, a few different research awards. These are really significant because what I can see here is that this is someone who's been really engaged in his undergraduate community. He's been engaged within his department. He's done incredibly well. He's just been a leader on campus. So huge strength. As you're reading every application, you're thinking about what's this person going to be like at our law school? How are they going to contribute? Are they going to excel? What are they going to add? And I just see someone who really contributes a lot to his academic communities. Okay, so the next thing in this application that I get to is the personal statement. And the personal statement is such an important part of the application. It is, when I read files at Chicago, I'd say it was usually my favorite part to read. It's really the place where you learn, well, if it's successful, it's the place where you learn someone's story. I read 20 files in a row. Oftentimes things can start to look the same and sound the same. And, when you get to a personal statement that's truly, really authentic and genuine, it's quite refreshing. So this personal statement, he talks about his love of language. And, he covers a lot of ground in it, kind of talking about his love of language, somewhat from an academic perspective. But then he also talks about having a speech impediment growing up. And it's clear that this is a really honest personal statement. There's nothing inauthentic about it. And he's very open and honest, and there's a vulnerability to it. When an applicant's honest, even if it's something that you personally, as a reader, didn't experience, it's kind of impossible not to relate to that person. And then he, walks through this progression of really how he overcame that. And it's actually it's really compelling. I think what he's done so well in this personal statement is kind of the academic and professional. What are his interests? What's led him to law school? It shows like a real intellectual curiosity, but then it's also so deeply personal. So after the personal statement, I'm going to move on to the resume. And there's a lot of things that I'm looking for in the resume. The first thing is that it's just a really helpful tool to get the chronology. It really kind of sums everything up. What are the years they were in school? What were they doing over the summers? What kinds of things were they involved in? So in one sense, it's like I'm initially looking at the resume, just almost skimming it to get that chronology, and then I really dig in into more detail. I noticed several things on this resume. The first one being similar to what I mentioned when talking about the academic honors and awards. This person just simply has an outstanding resume, and I mean that in terms of the content. I can tell that this applicant is not someone who padded his resume. I can tell this is not someone who is doing things just for the purpose of putting them on the resume. This is a really engaged student who seems to care deeply about his community and making a contribution and pursuing his interests. Very involved on campus, leadership experience in a number of different organizations, substantive service experience. So, you're always looking on the resume for, while you want to see a range of experiences, of course, you want to have well-rounded applicants, you also want to see depth. You want to see applicants who are doing things not because they think it'll look good on our resume, but because they really care about it. A lot of his involvement is over all 4 years of college. There's leadership roles in the organizations. There's just a lot of substance here when it comes to his leadership and involvement. In addition to having a 4.0 GPA, which obviously indicates that he took his academics very seriously, he's got a lot of substantive research and writing experience, which is only a plus in law school. This is someone who made the most of his undergraduate education. And one thing I would note as I'm looking at this resume and thinking about this applicant's educational experience is, a question that I used to get from applicants all the time is, well, does my undergraduate school matter and how does that factor in? And one of the things I noticed about this applicant is that this is someone who's coming from a large Big Ten institution. It's a place where, you can get lost or you don't have to be really involved. Every educational experience is what you make of it. And this is certainly someone who made the most of his educational experience. Given that this is an applicant who is will be coming straight from undergrad, he has a few summer internships. So, not a ton of work experience, but this resume is so extensive. Some of the things you're looking for with work experience, particularly for an applicant who's coming straight from undergrad, you want to see maturity. You want to see things that would indicate a sense of professionalism. With this individual's resume, those aren't concerns for me because of the extent of his leadership experience on campus and some more professional-oriented organizations that he's been involved with. Okay, and then in every application, we will have all of the applicant's undergraduate and graduate transcripts. As readers, we really do look at these. This one's an easy one because the applicant has a 4.0. And what I mean by easy is that there's no real trend to spot. It's quite consistent, obviously. But one of the things I am looking at is I want to see what classes they've taken. Were they challenging themselves? This is a person who was in the honors college, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of substantive research and writing. This is someone who took a challenging course load and did extremely well. This is any 4.0 is a strong 4.0, but this is a strong 4.0. If I were reading this application at the University of Chicago Law School, I would have no concerns about his ability to excel in the classroom. And I'm thinking back to that resume and how substantive some of those experiences were. And, I'm noticing how he was able to carry such a high GPA, such a heavy course load, while having such significant extracurricular involvement. I'm looking at the ability to maintain these grades with a significant level of outside commitment. And the final thing that would be in this application, which I don't have in front of me, are letters of recommendation. But I do have who submitted letters of recommendation for this applicant, and it looks like he submitted 3, all 3 of which are professors. There's different schools of thought on this, and schools may vary a bit about their preferences on letters of recommendation. There's some schools that really have a strong preference for academic letters. There's some that like to see an academic letter, but they also like to see professional letters. At Chicago, we really put a lot of emphasis on the academic letters. I suspect, given this applicant's academic record and extracurricular involvement, that these are strong letters. And the fact that he has 3 different professors, again, coming from a large institution. So while I'm not able to read those, I can see the approach that he took. I suspect they only added value to his application. when I get to the end of the application, I'm really thinking about the application as a whole. As you go through each application, you are, of course, you're kind of evaluating each individual piece of it, but you're not looking at those things as individual pieces either. Everything fits together. And so you're constantly thinking about each piece of the application in the context of everything else. So as I look at this application, at this stage would be where I would, issue a recommendation. And this is a strong application, and one of the reasons it's so strong is because of the consistency of it. I don't see much weakness with this application. Given that this is an applicant with a 4.0 and a 172 LSAT, both of those numbers are above the University of Chicago Law School's medians. Some of the things that may be things I think about or could be a concern, which is someone coming straight from undergrad, a different applicant coming straight from undergrad who had a much thinner resume, I could feel differently, because then I may have some concerns about that person's maturity and professionalism. But this individual's resume was 2 full pages. I have seen applicants coming straight from undergrad where their resume is barely even 3/4 of a page. So this applicant in particular really just didn't present any of the concerns that I think sometimes law schools may have about someone coming straight from undergrad without substantive work experience. This is someone who academically has excelled, extracurricularly has excelled, and I think that stands out the most is it is someone who they make the most of their opportunities. And when I look at this application, I see someone who is going to do well in the classroom, but who is also going to get involved and is going to be a leader, and is going to be a leader throughout his life. This would be an easy admit for me.
You are correct. This person was admitted.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the second application. And this applicant has a 3.75 GPA. And has taken the LSAT 2 times. The first LSAT take was a 168. The second LSAT take was a 176. So I'll mention those numbers now, and then I'm going to come back to those as we go through the application. So now with this application, I'm doing the same thing. I'm starting with the application form itself, and just noticing the basic demographics, nothing really of note here other than also with this applicant, I do notice that she has strong attention to detail here. She's formatted everything consistently, filled everything in. One thing I noticed as I'm going through the education section is that there's a lot of community college transfer credits on here. There's several of them actually. And it's a little confusing to me as I'm looking through the application. So as I go through, I'm gonna want to figure out what these are. Pretty easily, I can tell a couple of them are, advanced placement credit, courses taken in high school. So those are straightforward. But then the others, it looks like some were during the summers of undergrad. So I'm just gonna need to piece together the timeline here a bit, and we'll see how this goes throughout the rest of the application. It's fine. It's not a significant thing. It's just something that I'm going to have to figure out as I go. So similarly in this application, I notice a really strong academic honors and awards section. One thing I would note is that just came to mind as I'm looking at this, because she has Dean's List awards on here. So in these 2 applications that I'm reviewing today, it's kind of hard because I can't show you exactly what I'm looking at. These are not just Dean's List awards. So I know I've spent a lot of time talking about, I've been pretty effusive about how strong these academic award sections are, and that's because they really stand out. They are on the stronger side to what I've seen, both in the number of them, but then also in what they are. These are not just kind of your garden variety, Dean's List, or an award given to everyone with above a 3.6 GPA. These are truly substantive things given to leaders on campus, and in her case, in this applicant's case, she's achieved a lot with her research and writing, and she's received several research funding, awards, some departmental awards. And when I see this, I also think professors are really going to enjoy working with her. She has a lot of research and writing experience with professors, which is incredibly well suited to an academic environment. So now I'm moving on to her personal statement. It's interesting because as I'm getting into this file, I'm finding myself saying some similar things to how I described the other application, but then I'm also starting to see some real differences. Similar to the last application, one of the things I loved about that personal statement is how it was both personal and, I don't know if professional is the right word, but it also demonstrated some real academic interest and, intellectual curiosity, and, it really demonstrates some of the qualities that you're looking for in attorneys. It shows someone who's goal-oriented. So it really showed some of those professional characteristics, some of the characteristics that you want to see in a student, but then it also was very personal. This personal statement is pretty similar in that respect. She almost really focuses on an anecdote that comes out of her work in Central America. She tells the story of one particular political campaign and discusses a lot of the corruption and kind of what she discovered through her field research. So she's talking about what she discovered during that time. And one of the things that stands out to me is that she's done something really successfully that's kind of hard to do. She tells a story here about something she experienced, and she's talking about something that isn't her. She's talking about political corruption, and it's easy to tell that story and then have your reader think, wow, that's really interesting. This was a really interesting thing to read about, but I didn't learn anything about the applicant. And she manages to really demonstrate some things about herself and her, in particular, you really see some strength in her research abilities, but also the way that she thinks about issues. So she's managed to really weave in just some information that tells me something about her while she's relaying this anecdote and talking about the corruption that she viewed. So she ends this personal statement in a very logical way. It's a logical progression where she talks about this experience during her field research and how it motivated her to go to law school. So this applicant gets very specific at the end of her personal statement about what she wants to do with her law degree. Sometimes when an applicant is really specific about what they want to do, of course that's totally fine if they know that's what they want to do. The important thing is that it is supported by the applicant's background so that it sounds informed and it sounds knowledgeable. And in this case, it's absolutely supported by her background. It makes perfect sense. It's clear that she understands what she's talking about when she says that this is what she wants to do. There's times where someone will articulate a really specific goal and it's not really supported by anything in that individual's personal statement or their resume or otherwise in their application. So it is important that when someone is articulating a specific goal, that that there's a basis for it, and it's a basis you can see from the application. So next, I'm going through her resume, and this is another strong resume. It's primarily strong because it's elaborating on, or I guess just giving more detail and more substance to some of those research awards and academic awards that she identified in the application itself. There are several substantive papers here and a lot of substantive research with faculty. And she also has some peer-reviewed publications. This resume is 2 pages long. It's a little tricky. This resume strength is also part of its weakness in a way because there's so much on here. It is really condensed, and I personally am not one who is bothered by cramming a lot of information on a resume. As long as it's formatted properly and professionally, and hers is, I'm fine with it. I do have colleagues that I know feel strongly about readability in white space on a resume. So I think for some of my colleagues, this resume may have a lot on it. One of her strengths is that when you look at this resume, you see through all of her different research and writing experiences, you see someone who has tremendous intellectual curiosity. She's really interesting, and she cares about a lot of different issues. That is evident. She's someone that you kind of feel like you'd want to sit down and have coffee with her because she could probably talk about a lot of just really interesting things. She's got a couple of internships that are kind of similarly interesting, but at the same time, there's so much in here that it's a little overwhelming. And I feel like some of the experiences that she has may get a little lost because it would take a long time to read this resume in detail. Your average application reader just may not have the time to do that. There's just a lot on here. I noticed that she has an interest in skills section at the end of her resume, which is something that we always recommend and that I love seeing, because you never know what common ground you will have with the person reading your application. So I can see that she has, for as strong as her resume is in some of the academic interests, she has outside interests. I can see someone that's well-rounded. She is a musician. She also has some outside interests and culinary interests. It kind of goes with that theme of someone who's just really interested in the world and learning and exploring. I have no doubt from what I've already seen in her personal statement and from her resume that she's going to have interesting things to say in the classroom, and she's going to be an interesting conversationalist. So this applicant graduated in 2019. So recently, but one question that I have, and something that's noticeably absent from this resume, is that I don't know what she's doing now. I can guess that she may be doing some research. I see that in summer 2019, she was doing some research, but then I have to go to another section, into an awards and grants section, to see that she is presenting it at a conference. There's a few reasons that's not great. One, you always want to know what the applicant's doing. You don't want gaps on the resume. So even if it's a recent graduation from college like this one is, I'm not sure what she's been doing for the last year. I suspect she's been busy. She seems like a very busy person, but I don't know. And I also had to piece it together from a few different sections on her resume. So that's not ideal. You want this to be an easy read for the people reading your application. You do not want them to have to piece anything together. And so I'm starting to feel a bit of a theme with this application that, as I mentioned earlier, she has a lot of the transfer credit that as I saw it, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to piece all this together and figure out a timeline. And then now, as I was looking at her resume, I thought, okay, I'm not sure what she's doing now. I have to try to piece that together. I'm starting to see a bit of a theme here. I have to do a little more work than I want to as an admissions reader to figure all of this out. This applicant has also submitted a diversity statement. And I guess this is a good time to note that my prior applicant did not submit a diversity statement, and that's okay. It's okay to not submit one. It's okay to submit one. The question is it the right thing for your application? In this case, this applicant submits really honest diversity statement about her gender identity. She really opens up. It's incredibly honest. It accomplishes what a diversity statement should, in that it certainly helps me as the reader get to know something that's a really consequential part of who she is. And then it also shows me what this experience meant to her and how that relates to becoming a law student. I think one of the most effective things is she talks about how it helped her learn to question different social structures and just how it's informed her thinking. So it's actually a wonderful and an appropriate diversity statement. This is a situation where it certainly makes sense to include a diversity statement, and I feel like it really added value to her application and helped me get to know something that's a really central part of who she is and affects the way that she views issues and views the world. Something interesting about this diversity statement, though, at the end, she goes on to say something that's quite specific. And as you may recall, and now I'm, if you can see me, scanning around on the computer, I'm going back up to her personal statement. That's something that happens. When you're reading an application, you may think, wait a second, what did I read here? Or I need to go back to that. So I'm actually going back to her personal statement right now because I recall that she said something very specific about her career goals at the end, about wanting to be a human rights lawyer and specialize in campaign finance. It's not that these things are necessarily inconsistent, and it's totally okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's a really awesome thing if an applicant has different areas of interest in things that fascinate them or different problems that they want to solve. That's terrific. But it's kind of how she approached it. She went so specific in two different pieces of her application that it kind of confused me. It made it go from feeling like, wow, this is really specific and informed, to I'm just a little confused, it's a little scattered. Whereas if she had said, there's a lot of different issues that interest me or a lot of problems I want to solve, and these are two of them, that would be totally different. It's really just, I think in the way it's presented. It still doesn't change my impression that overall this is a positive. This is someone who identifies issues that she wants to solve. But it does confuse me a bit. I'm also at this stage seeing, as I mentioned earlier, seeing just a lot of pieces of this application that, again, have to be kind of pieced together, because you're always looking at the application in a whole, and it's a cumulative thing. You're looking at all the parts and how they work together. So this applicant submitted a second addendum. This is a GPA addendum. In this GPA addendum, she covers a couple of things. First thing that she does is she talks about her undergraduate institution's grading policy and tries to provide some relevant context for that. If I can backtrack for a moment and just speak generally to a GPA addendum, there are certainly times where it makes sense to submit one. There may be personal circumstances, life circumstances that really affected your grades during a certain semester, or or during one particular year of college. If there is information that the applicant thinks is relevant context to evaluating their transcript, then certainly schools want to know that. This GPA addendum, though, I think it was actually a mistake to submit it, because first, I notice as I go through the file, after her transcript, her undergraduate institution actually includes a statement about their grading policy. They say basically the same thing that she does. So it's unnecessary, and it certainly has more credibility when it comes from the institution itself. So she didn't need to submit it. And then the other thing about this one is I get what she was trying to do, and I respect parts of her approach. This is someone who says she chose notoriously difficult courses and paper topics, and she chose the classes because she wanted to. And certainly choosing classes because you want to challenge yourself and not shying away from difficult courses, that's a positive, of course. The, curious thing to me is that until her junior year, she had never seen nor asked for her grades. That raises a bit of a judgment question to me, because I don't find choosing courses because they're interesting and because they're difficult and because they'll challenge you and being aware of your grades to be mutually exclusive. It kind of seems a bit like burying your head in the sand to me and not taking into account certain realities. I mean, if you know that you're going to be potentially, if there's any inkling, that you could be applying to law school or applying to a graduate program, and I suspect in her case that she knew that one of those may be in her future, I feel like you really need to know your grades. And it also raises a question of, don't we all want some way to evaluate our performance and benchmark ourselves? So I think while she was trying to provide some additional context, which isn't a bad thing, I don't think it was necessary in this application and probably did more harm than good. And now the final thing that I'm getting to with this application is her transcripts. Because of all the transfer credit, there's a lot of them. I'm able to, as I go through them, see some of these courses were taken over the summer. So I have a bit more context now, and that makes more sense to me, and I'm able to see what some of these transcripts are and how they fit into her undergraduate education. So this applicant has also submitted 3 letters of recommendation, and I suspect that they're quite strong based on who's writing them. One is her thesis advisor, and we know that she had a strong thesis. And then another professor whom she collaborated with on a research project, and another professor that she had for 2 courses. So I think those were wise choices for letters of recommendation. At this point, I'll give a summary of some of my reactions to this application and its strengths and weaknesses. And this is a tough application for me, actually, because there's so much good stuff in it. I think in many ways, she is a fantastic law school applicant, and she has qualities that any law school is going to love. I have no doubt that this is someone who will be engaged in the classroom and is going to ask interesting questions. And as I mentioned earlier, I just feel like she has a lot to say, and she's done a lot of interesting things. There's some questions in this application, though, and I think this application is one where I think the biggest issue is actually in presentation and in how this information was presented to the law school. In some cases, there was too much information, and she could have been more judicious about what she shared with the law school, such as in the GPA addendum. But then there's some things that are noticeably absent. For me, one thing is I want her to be more clear about what she's doing now. What is she doing from May 2019 until she starts law school in the fall? The other thing, at the very beginning, I mentioned that this is an applicant who's taken the LSAT twice. She went from a 168 to a 176. That's a decent jump. I mean, an 8-point jump. And the question of whether to submit an LSAT addendum, and it depends on the situation and it's context specific. If she'd gone from a 160 to a 168, schools will say different things on this and have different opinions. I personally would not have been overly concerned about that. I don't know that that's a situation where I would have felt like I need to see an LSAT addendum. Going from a 168 to a 176, a 176 is such a high score, and there's so relatively few people that achieve that score. I think I could have benefited from, I kind of want to know what happened. I want to know why she did so much better that second time, and I really wouldn't be looking for anything more than her honest assessment. And if that's, I changed my approach to studying, or the first time I took it, I was researching, 40 hours a week, or, whatever the situation is, I could use a little more context. And I think that lack of context stands out in this application where there's almost information overload. There's a lot of information in here, so it's noticeably absent. So I think it's like, this is an application that's strong in so many ways, but just has there's just some things in it that may cause the reader to have some questions. And when you have a situation with an applicant who, if you'll recall, her GPA was a 3.75, which is certainly a great GPA, and she should be very proud of her academic performance. But the reality is that it is below median at the school we're talking about, at the University of Chicago Law School. So you have an applicant who's a splitter. You have an applicant with a GPA below and an LSAT above. That's really a decision that can go either way. And anytime there's some questions, you think, okay, well, we've got some questions. We really love a lot about this applicant. We've got some questions, though. Maybe let's just hold off for a bit. I can certainly see reasons to admit this applicant. I think she'd add a lot. But then given some of the questions about how some of the information was presented, or some questions that come up because of information that wasn't provided in this application, I would not be surprised if this applicant was, if she were waitlisted.
Is that your official guess that she was waitlisted?
My guess is that she's waitlisted. If it were me reading this application, I would really probably hem and haw quite a bit about what my recommendation would be. And I could probably be convinced either way to admit or waitlist. But my guess is that she was waitlisted.
You are correct. She was waitlisted.
I hope this gives some insight into how an application is read, and thanks for bearing with me as I go through all of the different pieces. I think one of the misconceptions that I hear a lot is that law schools don't really read the applications, or they go through them quickly. And I can certainly say from my experience, both personally as an admissions reader and from my colleagues, that's not the case. Law schools spend a lot of time on applications, and they really do look at all of the individual pieces, but then also think about how these fit together and how this narrative that the person is creating, what that means for the type of student they would be. I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching.